Hey guys, how's it going? Value Venture Investing here today. So today we're talking about Apple. Apple just recently released their Q3 2024 earnings here. As of late, Apple's been on quite a tear, hitting about 230 a little while ago here before dropping off. I sold about 100 shares at 230, just trimming my position a little bit. But today we're going to talk about these earnings that occurred that were actually pretty good in a lot of ways. In terms of if they beat analyst expectations, yeah, it was pretty much a beat all around. Revenue was $85.77 billion for the quarter. The expectation was 84.46, beat there. Earnings per share $1.40 versus $1.35 expected. Cash, they're looking at about $153 billion in cash right now. Of course, they're trying to be net cash neutral going forward, but still a huge amount of money. Net cash, I think they're somewhere around $50 billion or something still at this point. iPhone revenue, they had $39.29 billion. The expectation was $38.95, so quite a pretty big beat there on iPhone revenue as well. Mac revenue, $7 billion. It was strong this quarter versus $6.98 estimated. iPad revenue was $7.16 billion versus $6.6 billion. Pretty huge beat there on the iPad revenue. Wearables, home, and accessories didn't do quite as great this quarter, but still pretty big beat, $8.09 billion versus $7.79 billion. And of course, services revenue, Apple's darling here lately, $24.21 billion versus $23.96. So overall, pretty impressive beat all around here. Looking at their income statement here, like I said, total net sales were $85.7 billion. Last year's, year over year was 81.7, so significant growth in terms of the revenue here. The gross margin as well, nice to see, 39.6 billion, higher gross margin, probably because we have a higher mix of services, which has a gross margin around 70%, things like that. So it's 39.6 billion versus 36.4 billion. I think I say this every quarter, but it's like $8 billion for the quarter. $8 billion now they've spent in the quarter. They were still spending a ton last quarter, 7.4 billion. So hopefully a lot of this comes to fruition in terms of the AI, generative AI, all these types of things. The only other thing here that was a bit interesting was their other income. It helped them a little bit that they had $142 million come in there, whereas last quarter it was loss of $265 million. Minuscule, but just something that made a bit of a difference to the bottom line. Net income was $21.4 billion versus $19.8 billion. So I believe this was a record June quarter. Of course, that brought their earnings per share to $1.40 versus $1.26. Of course, they're buying back a lot of shares. We'll get into a little bit of that here soon. But yeah, their EPS keeps increasing, which makes your stock cheaper, of course. Net sales by reportable segment up every reportable segment except for China. Greater China has been an issue for a while, but I mean, look at Americas, 37.6 versus 35.3 a year ago. Europe was 21.8 versus 20.2, big. Japan's 5 billion versus 4.8. Rest of Asia Pacific 6.3 versus 5.6. Like, these are huge. But we're still seeing a little bit of a drop, $14.7 billion in the Greater China versus 15.7 a year ago. But still, because of all the other increases, of course, that's where we've seen this revenue increase as well. Now, the net sales by category, iPhone, $39.29 billion versus $39.66 billion. So I think it's about 1%. We've seen this drop. Of course, I've argued that this isn't the biggest portion of Apple going forward, and I hope that it will not be. I hope it continues to be a big portion of it, but there's a lot higher margin businesses, and we'll get into that as well. Mac was significantly increased, $7 billion for the quarter versus 6.8. That was due to the timing of the release of some of their new Macs, specifically the MacBook Air. iPad, $7.16 billion versus 5.7. Huge increase there. I remember last quarter, I think it was the one before that, we saw a lot of weakness there, but we've got the new releases of the iPad, specifically the Pro, I believe the Air as well. So yeah, that made a big difference. Wearables, home, and accessories was the 1 weak spot, $8 billion versus $8.2 billion a year ago. Now, they had some difficult compares there in terms of AirPods, things of that nature. I guess the watches maybe are not selling as great as they used to. But that was the only really one weak point of all of them, but still not that far off. Services, again, I say this every quarter, is growing $24.2 billion in the quarter versus 21.2 billion. And like I said, guys, it has almost a gross margin of 75%. So fantastic that that's still growing for this company. Only other thing I saw here was on their statement of cash flows here. Cash generated by their operating activities was 91.4 versus 88.9. So operating cash flow really strong this quarter. So I wanted to mention that as well. There was actually kind of, you look at their investing activities here as well, quite a bit of kind of interesting things as well. I won't go through it there. But financing activities, again, repurchases of common stocks, 69.8 billion versus 56.5 billion. So that's kind of representing their capital return program and how they are accelerating really buying back shares. Now, conference call, I didn't really find too much in this conference call that was too groundbreaking, earth-shattering type thing. So, of course, like I said, this was a June quarter revenue record. Why did the stock go up? Yeah, I believe, what was it up on Friday? Let's go here. Yeah, it wasn't that much. It was higher at some points. But the overall market has been kind of on a little bit of a downturn here. One thing I do want to mention is that, we are getting probably a bit of rotational money as well. Rates are dropping. Presumably, they're dropping in some places, like specifically in Canada here, they have been. And you might see some of the smaller caps making bigger moves, right? Also, Warren Buffett has sold quite a bit of Apple as well. So there's different things. Other companies, Amazon didn't have as strong as earnings as some people thought. So, that's probably a pretty appropriate response. Plus, we've seen this run on Apple, like going up quite a bit. Like I said before, services are up 14% year over year. Huge. And I hope that continues. That's just something that they talked about on the conference call. Again, the iPhone revenue was down 1% year over year. On a constant currency basis, they grew. They've been saying this the last several quarters. So I know that foreign exchange has been an issue for them, but it just seems like it's been an issue and over again. If you guys know anything more about that, have any more insight on that, strong US dollar, comment down below. Gross margins were down on products and services, but services are still nearly 75%. So that's just something to note as well that they talked about on the conference call. And the only other kind of interesting thing I heard them say is ChatGPT. They're initially starting this with world knowledge. They're trying to do Apple Intelligence for the more personalized data. And of course, we've seen these betas coming out. It's just starting to kind of roll out as we speak. ChatGPT isn't part of it yet or anything like that. But it makes me wonder with that initially comment, the way that Tim Cook said it, it almost sounded like they are going to be building their own generative AI to rival them, because they just said we're initially going to be using ChatGPT for this, and they didn't want to discuss any of their terms because it was all confidential. So that's very interesting. That's something to monitor going forward. If you guys know anything about that, let me know. In terms of guidance, foreign exchanges continue to be a headwind. Again, like I said before, they've been talking about that for quite some time. Great for the stock, though, revenues to grow year over year like it did in the June quarter. So we're going to still see growth occurring even in these challenging times. I think that the market, the interest rate hikes are finally starting to affect consumers a bit. Services, again, to grow double digits. So the growth is not even stopping there. So overall, really good quarter for Apple. Interesting to see what's going to happen going forward. But the problem is with interest rates dropping, this election in there, there's a lot of talk of maybe a potential recession. Man, there's a lot of things on the horizon right now. But overall, at least this was a strong quarter for Apple. Leave your comments down below. If you guys can like and subscribe, that'd be great. And I'll see you guys in the next one.